My name is Tony, and I'm working on a 1948 MGTC. And one of the things that I've noticed online is there's very little information about restoring the original shock absorbers. So here goes. I decided to tackle all four because they were all pretty well hooped. And this is what one looks like when I sent it to the engineering shop to have the shaft knocked out with a 10-ton press. It's almost impossible, I would suggest, to get these out if they're originals, except with a 10-ton press minimum. And the shaft then is able to be extracted, and what you'll discover is that it is splined, which is really what does arrest its extraction. In this particular case, it was leaking oil badly, and the reason for that is somebody had previously, I'm presuming, worked on this shock absorber or shock absorbers and had removed the oil seals and never replaced them. So we have found that Timkins works very well, and I will introduce you to the Timkins oil seals in a few moments. But in the meanwhile, the important thing is to disassemble these completely and make sure that each piece is properly labeled so that you can reassemble units as they ought to be. And what I have done is put all the individual parts into a little container for each shock absorber so we can reintroduce them in proper order when we reassemble them. Once the job is complete, they look pretty good with several coats of trim-clad paint or similar. The important thing, of course, is that each rubber grommet has been replaced, and that in itself is a huge challenge. And there are special tools that from the frame up cells in order to accomplish the insertion of the rubber grommets. As the cleaning process begins, it's important to properly disassemble everything. And one of the big challenges is to get the cam out so that the compressors can be extracted. So the way to do that is to take some needle nose pliers and somehow see if you can prise the fitting out of here. Sometimes screwdriver extraction helps. There we're going, and out it comes. So it's a cam that actuates the shaft at the bottom, and it's also contains a spline. Once that's out, then it's fairly easy to extract the entire shaft from the fitting. It's in two pieces on a sprung arrangement so that the cam can go down and activate the movement of the shaft. I have found it's unnecessary to disassemble these two pieces. Suffice to say that they need to be very thoroughly cleaned in solvent, because this is where the little valves are that we will assemble later on. Here it's easy to see that the oil seals have not been inserted recently. This has been a unit that has been leaking oil, and before we can go any further, all the gumph has to be cleaned out to make sure that it's completely ready and clean, because now this unit is empty. It is only a casting. Once you have it down to the casting, it can be cleaned and inserted into a bucket of solvent. Once most of the gunk has been cleaned out, I take some emery paper and clean all surfaces where seals are going to be required, particularly where the oil seals go in. Make sure that they are smooth and ready to be lubricated and for the parts to be inserted. Typically where the bearing surfaces which need to be sealed may have been damaged. There's one that's slightly pitted. Important just to sand them smooth so that when the job is completed, everything fits together the way it should. And then we will put them into a solvent bath and make sure they're completely cleaned up. Once they are relatively clean, I like spraying them with something like brake parts clean, which leaves them smooth and dry and ready for painting. I used a regular wire brush to clean up the threads. Once the threads are clean and properly lubricated, everything will assemble a lot more easily when the time comes. One of the most difficult parts to remove are what are called the expansion plugs, or where I come from, they're called Welsh plugs. A new one looks like this. However, the old ones need to be extracted, and the only way to do that is to drill holes. And I used a little Dremel to bridge the gap between two holes, and then put a screwdriver in and basically pry it out. It's a job of force. There's no other alternative. Here, all cleaned up and ready for assembly, are the parts of the right front shock absorber on the MGTC. Now, piece by piece, this of course is the arm with the bushes replaced, the shaft nicely polished up, ready to accept the oil seals, and before it went to the shop for disassembly, it was taped and marked as right front shock absorber. Exactly the same with the main housing, inscribed with a Dremel right front, so we know which parts belong to which parts and we don't get them mixed up. This is the pump, internal pump that moves left to right based on the actuator arm. And as you can see, the two pieces are very nicely sprung together with oversized circlips, sort of modifications of circlips. Very clever arrangement, actually. The main housing has been cleaned out to accept the new oil seals. And then on the end of the pump are the one-way return valves, and we'll show you how to assemble the little one-way valve, the little retainer ring, the pressure clip, and the seals, and finally the screw cap that goes on. The same for the other side, all in order, ready to be reassembled. These are the mounting bolts to get the shock absorber back onto the car chassis. So piece by piece, let's see how the reassembly goes. With the help of our friendly MG blogs and whatnot on the computer, internet, we managed to source seals that work perfectly in this situation. These Timken seals, the only number that I can find is seal 340413, and they come in great little boxes. It says made in Taiwan. There's the number 340413. So originally I think there was just one oil seal on each shaft, but Timken's doesn't have one this thick, so in fact two together work pretty well. So these seals must go seal side down and bearing side up. They should press in with a little bit of persuasion. Don't hit them too hard, just tap them in gently, and the next one on top. Until it's nice and flush, and they go in reasonably easily and make a great seal. Gently lubricate the outside of the shaft with the same oil that's eventually going to go in here, which is Dynalite shock oil from Moss or from the frame up. And if you go to any motorcycle shop, just regular motorcycle shock oil is pretty well the same. So it will then slide in nice and easily, and the shaft should move in and out with ease. Now, it does have to be oriented to receive the cam, and we will do that just knocks in nice and easily, sort of. The important part now is to make sure that the shaft is equidistant in each end, and by placing a finger in each end you can sort of center it and get a visual on it, so that when you put the cam in and everything is centered, you know that the shaft will be oriented exactly the right way, with the shock absorber centered in the center where it ought to be. So the shaft goes in where the oil seals are. You can see that previously I scored this with a Dremel to show that that is the orientation of the arm, because the lefts and rights are oriented differently. So once we know which way it's oriented, we can simply find it and press it in. Easy peasy. A little bit of gentle persuasion was required in this case, and it bedded down very nicely. The reason we assemble the ends as a last resort is that we want to make sure that when the shaft is inserted, it's inserted with the right orientation when the pump is right centered. Once you get the ends assembled, you can no longer ascertain that the pump is centered properly. So it's important to get the shaft in first and last of all the assembly. And here the retaining clip is in place, being slid into the two little narrow apertures around the inside fitting. Also note, as the shaft is now turned, the plunger shaft in the center of the shock absorber moves up and down. Now the final assembly requires the gasket, two gaskets, and the cap, and finally the screw cap on top of all. I simply use a pipe wrench to tighten these up. Works about as good as anything, and they need to be fairly snug but not over wrenched. So once we have everything nicely reassembled, one of the last jobs is to put the Welsh plug, or expansion plug as they call them in North America, back in place. Make sure that the recess is cleaned out nicely. These can be purchased at almost any auto shop. This is a 1 1/8, which fits perfectly, and when they are snugly inserted and hammered in the middle, they expand and lock in place. So simply take a hammer and knock it in place, and it's done. The entire assembly is now ready to be filled with Dynalite shock oil, and I use a simple turkey baster to pull the oil and fill. So it works very well. Once the oil gets in, it's almost impossible to move the arm by hand anymore, which shows it's functioning in the way it should. Just keep filling with oil and slowly getting rid of all the bubbles. Yep, this is functioning pretty good. Here is the oil cap for the top, which we've cleaned up, together with a nice little replacement gasket. One of my earlier ones that I assembled, I had great difficulty sourcing the gaskets, and I made the gasket seal with a product called The Right Stuff, which actually does a pretty good job, but would be far more difficult to disassemble later on. Place the gasket and the cap, get the screws tightened in and cinched down.